Did we just find out who maybe testified in front of a reported grand jury hearing evidence in the Celeste Rivas Hernandez David case? And if this turns out to be true, this is someone very connected to the romantic homicide singer. Let's discuss. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, I have to say this real quick. If you're putting things out on social media, if you're in the content creation game, you might be wondering how we're able to share so many clips from all of these stories so quickly. Well, the answer is it's a secret. We use something called Opus Clip. This is not a secret anymore. This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it so easy to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio. It is so easy to use. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar, you sign up, you upload, and in minutes you have perfectly edited clips ready to go. For TikTok, Shorts, Reels, Opus Clip is your one-stop shop. And having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to help you share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to create your videos today. Got the latest in David we got to talk about. Okay, so where we last left off, we told you that it was being reported that a grand jury had been impaneled, right, to hear evidence in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose dead body was found in the trunk of a Tesla that was registered to the romantic homicide singer back in September out in LA. Now, there have been no arrests in connection with this case. There have been no charges. It was reported that David is being considered a suspect by the LAPD. But look, we can't even 100% confirm that a grand jury is in fact hearing evidence because grand juries are secret. They're supposed to be secret. It's not going to be confirmed by authorities. However, law enforcement sources apparently helped to confirm this, according to the LA Times. And according to the LA Times, they cite how in a court filing in this case, there is a reference to a GJ number, a grand jury number. I'll talk about that a little bit more because it was reported that there is an investigative grand jury that has been hearing evidence in this case for some time. Now, an investigative grand jury, if that's actually what this is different than what you might think. If this is true, an investigative grand jury doesn't issue indictments, formal charges. They can recommend charges, they can help with issuing subpoenas for witnesses, they can produce other evidence, and then usually all of that can be taken to another grand jury for an indictment. All of that to say, if this is true, we have a big development. TMZ is reporting that the president of David's touring company was questioned by a deputy district attorney in front of the grand jury on Monday. We are referring to Robert Morgenroth, who apparently heads up Mogul Vision, that's David's record label, and also Zara Brothers Travel, the touring company. Now, TMZ is reporting that Morgenroth comes out of the courtroom, is in the hallway, and was allegedly overheard telling his lawyer that the deputy DA who was questioning him, quote, "She was very pushy on why I didn't call police." And quote, "I said I feel like I didn't have the responsibility to do that and just wanted to continue with the tour." Let me break that down. We don't know if this is true, obviously, right? But if it's true, and if he was in fact questioned about this, and about Celeste's case, if that's the grand jury he's a part of, or what he's testifying to, that would signal that he potentially knew a crime was committed and didn't do enough. That the reference to the tour could be about David's tour, because after all, David was on tour when Celeste's body was found. The tour was ultimately canceled when this was making a lot of news, and David has basically been MIA since. And what exactly did Morgenroth know about what was going on? Does that mean David knew something? Does that mean David was connected to this? Obviously, there's a lot of questions. But to have someone directly connected to the singer being reportedly questioned in a grand jury proceeding, that's a big development that we have to talk about. And I should note that it was reported that the deputy DA presenting evidence to the grand jury, okay? So if this is true, it has been reported that that may be Beth Silverman. She is a career prosecutor who apparently handles some very big high-profile murder cases in the county. She once received the Centurion Award for Excellence in cold case investigations with technical support. She was the one who prosecuted Samuel Little, the most notorious serial killer in American history. Got 3 convictions against him. She is a big deal. Now, as we're trying to sort out that grand jury information, I have to also mention something else, another development. This is with respect to Steve Fisher. We've had him on the show before. He is the private investigator who was hired by the owner of the property that David was reportedly staying at, which was near where the Tesla with Celeste's body that was found inside. That property had been subject to a search warrant by police, by the way. So look, Steve has been quite vocal about his investigation. Obviously, he doesn't share all the details about what he has found, but he posted this on X, and we got to talk about it. Quote, "What's done in the dark will come to the light. Tomorrow morning, I have been ordered to appear in the Los Angeles County Criminal Court for an order to show cause hearing for contempt. I was not served with a summons to appear in court. I was not given a complaint outlining the alleged contempt to respond to. There is no case number, and I do not appear anywhere on the court's public docket. I was handed a handwritten note from a deputy district attorney on Friday and told to appear Tuesday morning." He also appears to have posted that note. "A punishment hearing in criminal court that is not even assigned a case number, seemingly because they do not want this to be public information. Love me or hate me, this should concern you. The fact that this is happening in our criminal court system is terrifying. That is why I am going public before the hearing tomorrow, which I will not be attending, so that the public and the press are aware of what is happening. Here is the backstory. Recently, I testified on 2 separate days as a witness before a grand jury. When I was served with the subpoena for the first day of testimony, 2 detectives came to my door at 6 a.m. and instructed me to immediately call the deputy district attorney. She told me that because I was now a grand jury witness, I was no longer allowed to speak about this case and that it would be illegal if I did. This put me in an impossible position. I have a client directly related to this case. If I cannot speak to my client, I am violating my professional duty. This was the entire point of calling me as a grand jury witness. It was a strategy used to try to silence me. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner has publicly spoken about a similar silencing strategy being attempted against their office. Then I did my research on the law, spoke to lawyers, and found out I was being lied to. Here is the critical fact. In California, witnesses to a grand jury do not have a general obligation of secrecy. That obligation applies to the jurors and officers of the court. A witness is only bound to secrecy regarding anything they learn solely from the grand jury proceeding. It does not apply to anything they already knew before testifying or anything learned outside the grand jury. I want to pause here because many people are going to search this online, and Google AI is likely going to give them the wrong answer by claiming that witnesses must remain completely silent. If you click through to the actual sources it cites, you will see that the AI summary is incorrect. California law is silent on imposing total secrecy on witnesses. Instead, witnesses are routinely admonished that they may not disclose certain things, but those certain things only include what was learned from the grand jury proceeding itself, not independent knowledge or publicly known facts. In 1983, the California Attorney General issued a written opinion on this exact issue for legal clarification. It is very clear. I have attached screenshots of that opinion. I also want to be very clear about this. I never disclosed my testimony, even though the law would have allowed me to discuss my own testimony. I never publicly disclosed that I was a witness before the grand jury, not once and not twice. Instead, the deputy district attorney abused the power of the grand jury process in an apparent attempt to silence me. I was told that I broke the law, and I was given a handwritten note telling me to appear in criminal court for a contempt hearing. There is no summons, there is no case number. The matter does not appear on the public docket. There is no documentation outlining what I am accused of so that I can respond. I was also told that if I left town, I had to be back by Tuesday morning. I wrote a detailed letter to both the judge and the deputy district attorney explaining my position. They have had that letter since Friday afternoon. I received no response. With a hearing just hours away and the threat of a contempt charge hanging over my head in what appears to be a secret off-the-books court proceeding, I had no choice but to go public so that the people and the press are aware of what is happening. This is the only way I can protect myself from what I believe to be an abuse of power. It is frightening that this is happening at the highest levels of our court system. There is power in transparency. I was left no choice. So you can read between the lines and make a very strong argument that he's talking about the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case. We don't know for sure. Look, there is a lot We do not know about what is going on, partly because, and this is something that seemed to have been referenced by Steve Fisher, the medical examiner. The medical examiner, we reported this before, received a court order that was sought by the LAPD to place a security hold on any information being released from the ME's office. So no records or cause or manner of death information can be released to the public about Celeste. And as I mentioned before, the LA Times apparently reviewed this court petition seeking the security hold that makes reference to a grand jury number, or seemingly a grand jury number. Hence why they are reporting it's possible a grand jury has been convened here. And I will also say, the Robbery Homicide Division of the LAPD released a statement at the end of last month that said the following, quote, "The Los Angeles Police Department is aware of the recent stories posted by various media outlets about the David Celeste Rivas investigation and would like to dispel some information contained in their reporting. The body of Celeste Rivas was not frozen when it was discovered on September 8th, 2025, so that is directly contradicting what was reported by TMZ. They have actually been doubling down on their reporting and their sources. She had not been decapitated. We have evidence that David traveled to the Santa Barbara area sometime during the spring of 2025. The reason for that trip is still under investigation, and we've drawn no conclusions at this point about the relevance of the trip to this case. As far as the court order, the LAPD sought to seal the records of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's investigation into Celeste Rivas' death. That order was sought only to ensure detectives from Robbery Homicide Division learned of important information surrounding her death before the media and the public. The order was not sought to undermine transparency. No other information will be provided at this time." I want to make sense of this new development, the grand jury, right? This idea of who may have testified. Let me bring in once again Colin L. Schmitt, retired FBI agent, president, CEO of Kronos Litigation Experts. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Let's start here. How much credence do you give to the idea that we really know there is a grand jury being impaneled and that we really know who is testifying in front of the grand jury right now? Because it's definitely possible that this guy, Morgan Roth, was overheard and that he might be testifying in this case.
Well, it appears you have multiple data points confirming that there's a grand jury based upon the people who participated in the proceeding. So like you talked about the rules of secrecy, the DA's office and officers of the court, which happen to be robbery homicide detectives, are not going to reveal that information. And that won't, if indeed it is a grand jury and panel, it's not going to come out until after the indictment is filed. And then once the indictment is basically from the grand jury, and that will confirm all of these things that are going on.
If it is true that Morgan Roth is testifying, why would they want him to testify?
Well, I think generally speaking, in a violent crime, you don't do grand juries on the local level. You do a preliminary hearing, which means you would have a probable cause, you arrest somebody, and then you present your probable cause to a judge, and the judge would determine if you have enough probable cause to support that arrest. I think in this case, the grand jury was impaneled because they want to lock in the witness statements and have no surprises during trial. So I think it's a very effective legal strategy, because you're going to basically have your trial, know what all these people are going to say before you have to put them out in the public. But in terms of that person testifying, if he indeed testified, like I said, it won't be confirmed until there's an indictment. I think having him there as a witness is logical, because he was interacting with their person of interest throughout this whole process, and he is going to have some explaining to do if he indeed understood there was a crime, because there's another law, at least in the federal system, called misprision of felony, which means if you knew there was a crime and you took efforts not to report it, that puts you in some sort of legal jeopardy. So this case is starting to kind of come together, and I think it appears that there may be an indictment here shortly.
You mentioned what potential liability could be there if someone knew about a crime and didn't report it. But why grill him about that? Because I thought it was interesting to suggest, what was he told, by whom, when did he know it? Because you have somebody who's directly connected to David. You have somebody talking about the tour. The tour was going on when Celeste's body was discovered. There's still a question of how long she was in that car. They believe it was for quite some time. But just assuming these statements are true, and assuming that he was really grilled about this and was questioned about this, What does that tell you about his alleged involvement? What does that tell you about anybody else's alleged involvement? And of course, most importantly, what does that tell you about David's potential alleged involvement?
Take a step back and look at the elements of the crime, and knowledge and intent or consciousness of guilt demonstrates intent. So I think when they're saying, why didn't you report this? They're basically saying there was a cover up, and a cover up would be indicative of consciousness of guilt. So I think what she's trying to do is establish the consciousness of guilt, not only by him but by the person that they have targeted in terms of this investigation. So it is relevant that, oh, hey, why did you not report this? Because they want to know if somebody told him not to report this, and which that would show consciousness of guilt.
Is there a possibility that there could be an explanation here where David had absolutely no idea what was going on, that David had absolutely no idea that Celeste was in the car, that he wasn't informed of anything because he was on tour, they didn't want to distract him from tour? And we can jump to the other conclusion, right? We can jump to these other conclusions about what David's alleged involvement is. We don't know for sure. Again, he hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been criminally charged. Authorities haven't officially come out and called him a suspect or a person of interest. But is it possible that if you dissect that statement, you could wonder, was David properly communicated anything about what was going on?
Well, obviously we're speculating on this show, but you have
Sure.
to kind of apply a logical inference. He was very close to David. He was his tour manager. He's making lots and lots of money off of this guy. So there's a high probability that he was aware of the relationship between David and the decedent. And I want to make one more point. You have a lot of things going on in this case, but we still have to go back to the fact that a child was found dismembered in a car. Period. End of story. You have all these people getting involved and reporting on this and putting their opinions and this and that and the other. But we have to go back to, it's about justice for this child. She has rights too, even though she's deceased, and we have to respect those rights.
And to be clear, there is obviously mixed reporting on the state of her body. Was it dismembered or not? What we do know is she's dead. What we do know is her decomposed body was found in that car. There's a question of what happened. There's a question of, was this a homicide? Was this just a cover-up of her body and disposal of her body, which is insane to be thinking about. But again, you're 100% right. We want to keep that. We want answers because we want answers for her and her family. This idea, though, that you might have people testifying in front of the grand jury and potentially Mr. Morgenroth, does that also tell you anything about a second suspect? I've mentioned this before on Sidebar, I'll mention it again. You had acclaimed criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos, who said on his Two Angry Men podcast that there is a second suspect that has been identified by authorities, somebody who is connected to the disposal of Celeste's body, saying they've got this thing down to a timeline that's almost down to the minute, triangulated down to the location. It's social media, cell phone, Tesla, it's other GPS tracking devices. Is it possible that when we're talking about a grand jury, we're talking about potentially people who testified, including this guy who was connected to David, could this all be about a second suspect?
Well, I think it comes back to her legal strategy, just based on my experience using grand jury. She wants to make sure there's no surprises when they put this out, because the media attention on this is white hot. But to your point about a second suspect, that's part of the grand jury, an investigative grand jury, to ask those questions to see if there's some sort of either a conspiracy to be involved in this murder or crime or disposal of body, or was there a conspiracy to cover it up? She's using the grand jury like the founding fathers had designed it, is to conduct an investigation, get everything out in the record, and make sure that justice is served for her, complete justice. That means everybody that was involved in this will see justice.
Colin, it's no secret that law enforcement authorities are trying not to reveal too much about this investigation. Steve Fisher, that post on X, okay? There were a lot of parts in that post that line up with different aspects of this case, talking about his client who's connected to the case, talking about a deputy DA, referring to her as she, possibly Beth Silverman, this idea, testifying in front of a grand jury. We're talking about a potential grand jury here. The ME's office, right? I mentioned that before. His, take on what the ME's office is allowed or not allowed to say is very consistent with what we're seeing. I think it's a fair argument to say this is about the Celeste Rivas Hernandez David case. We don't know for sure. We don't know for sure what Steve is saying. What did you take away from that? His fight back against this, and this idea that also law enforcement and the DA's office, they're trying seemingly to not release any information about what's going on right now.
Well, as a former law enforcement officer and somebody who's a private citizen, if I'm asked to participate or assist in finding justice for a child, I'm going to do it. And I'm also a licensed private investigator, which is part of the code of ethics that private investigators in California are under. You know, arguably, you can make that argument where they have to cooperate with law enforcement. But the post was so long, and you have to take a step back and say, what was the harm to him to go back and testify and support this investigation and do what he needed to do and cooperate? If law enforcement asked me as a PI, hey, can you just keep it down a notch and just stay quiet while we get through this, I'm absolutely going to do that. And I'm going to tell them whatever you need me to do, I'm going to do. So to his point about he was blindsided by this, it appears to me they were kind of giving him a heads up before they did serve him with a summons to come down. That's what that note was about. But of course, we're only speculating at this point because I haven't talked to this Mr. Fisher about what really happened.
Can you still talk to your client about what's going on, about what you testified to in the grand jury? Because his point seems to be also like he's got a conflict here. You say I can't say anything, but I got a client I'm supposed to be reporting to.
Well, he's not a lawyer, so there's no private investigator privilege, so to speak, with a client, unless that client is a lawyer and the lawyer has put it under attorney-client privilege. So most likely, no, he has to cooperate, or he has to kind of, keep it down, kind of stop what he's doing, at least until they get through this grand jury phase. But to put that out on X with all of that information and basically airing his grievances, it's really not a good move in my opinion.
Okay, let me ask you this. Why is it such a big deal? What is the worst case scenario if the ME's office was allowed to release information? What's the worst case scenario if information from the grand jury was released? I think all of us need to understand why, if it's true, the LAPD, the deputy district attorney, why they don't want information released about this case, particularly if there's a grand jury going on, but why in general, so many eyeballs on this, a lot of speculation. We want the family to have answers. What is the biggest danger to an investigation, to potential charges, if information is released at this time?
Well, you basically have two reasons. One is a media reason, in my opinion, is basically they don't want to fuel the fire of all the speculation and conspiracy theories and all this. And so they want to kind of keep everything close to the vest. They've been through this. LA DA's office is the center of high profile crime. The second reason is based upon what's in the ME report, it might tip off somebody who doesn't know they're under suspicion. And so they want to make sure they keep all that to themselves, so they have an opportunity to perhaps talk to everybody and they're not tipped off.
If it's true Beth Silverman is heading up this case, I mentioned some of her career highlights. That's a big name to be a part of this. What do you make of that?
Well, just the fact that she impaneled an investigative grand jury shows me her level of, if true, good point. It shows me her level of sophistication and talent, and she knows what she's doing. And she is arguably probably the best homicide DA in that office and the most experienced. So she really is making sure, if it is true that she has a grand jury, that all of her T's are crossed and her I's are dotted, and it's going to be a clean prosecution, as clean as you can have a prosecution in this type of case.
I wanted to ask you real quick also about the Santa Barbara trip. I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about it, but it's now a point that seems to be confirmed by law enforcement they're looking into, whether or not David took this trip, whether or not that is somehow in connection to what happened to Celeste. either her death or disposal of her body, spring. What do you make of that?
Well, I think once again, speculating what's on the supercomputer that's in that Tesla, and or a phone, they're going to see a certain amount of time that he was in Santa Barbara, and that might be a key point in their timeline in terms of what happened to Celeste. Like I said, we don't know who did this, what they did, or who's doing it, but the fact, based on that, they confirmed this fact, the LAPD, that he was in Santa Barbara for a set period of time. I can only speculate that they may be matching up or reconciling that with her time of death. And that's why that time is so important of when he was in Santa Barbara.
Colin L. Schmitt, thanks for coming on, trying to make sense of this for us. Really appreciate it.
No problem. I appreciate it.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.